So let's dive into some quick wins, right? Because some folks out there are going to say, listen, I want to jump into this, but I don't have a ton of time to like plan something huge. Where can I go to just get right in and start making computer science happening? I think for elementary, Scratch Junior is a great entry point if you have no or very little background on coding or computer science. I love Scratch Junior. It is available, on most mobile devices, but it's a really simple version of Scratch, you might say, and it is a drag and drop block-based coding where students can go to this site, and I'll just click on it now. Um, and you have a variety of activities that are built in, and they come with task cards. They actually tell students how to go about creating each of these projects step by step. So even if you have students who are not proficient readers yet, they can follow along and figure out how to make this happen and make their character do the things on the activity. The awesome thing about this is, one, you're not just limited to the step-by-step instructions. Students can definitely start tinkering and replacing those blocks with other options and just trying on their own to see how their coded instructions make their character interact on the screen. And so they're going to take this and they're going to go in all kinds of different directions. And you as a teacher don't necessarily need to control or direct everything they're doing because they'll have some freedom to do that. Um, but what's even more awesome is that you're already hitting some of those standards that if you're new to CS might be a little scary at first. The straight up coding, uh, computer science standards, algorithms, control, modularity, program development, all of these things will be happening as students are doing these projects. If you're new to computer science and you teach the little ones, this is a great place for you to even tinker around and start learning how block-based coding works and to try your hand at it as well. So I highly recommend that. And let me just drop a link. I know you're going to have these slides, but I'll drop a link in the chat if anyone wants to check that out themselves. There's a link to the dribble the basketball one if you're interested. And you can just click back on teach to go back to the original list of activities. All right, another quick win. If you're a middle school teacher and you're really interested in coding, one quick win is MakeCode and Microbit. So Microbit is the physical microcontroller, and then MakeCode is the coding site by Microsoft. And essentially what you do is you get this little microcontroller, it plugs into the student's devices. It will work with Chromebooks. And students are able to do block-based coding, not too different from what's going on here in Scratch Junior, a little more advanced, of course. And they're able to then use their code to make things happen on the physical microbit, as well as some of the peripheral attachments that you can connect to it. You can actually go to the MakeCode site, and without even having the microbit, which I think it only costs like 20, 25 bucks, but even if you don't have a microbit, you can go in here and do any of these projects, and it actually has a simulator in it that'll let you see what it would look like if you had a microbit, and so you can do your coding right there and see what would light up and what would happen on your microbit. So no purchase necessary per se. You can learn. Again, if you're a teacher who's new to computer science and you need somewhere to learn, this is a great place to do it. If you want to buy a microbit or microbits for your students, you can, or you can just use the virtual one that's built in. And I really love that if you look, they have not just the block-based coding, but you can see here they have JavaScript and Python. So if you are wanting to push students into more advanced text-based coding, you can do that as well. And that addresses, again, some of these tougher to hit computer science standards I just screenshotted right here. Hardware and software, designing projects that combine hardware, so the physical microbit, and software from MakeCode to collect and exchange data. There you go, you're hitting that one right there. Systematically identify and fix problems. Guess what? They're going to run into problems with their code. It's not going to work the way they expect sometimes, and they're going to have to troubleshoot and try again. And finally, collecting data and transforming data. So there are sensors that you can connect to this device that can help them connect data from their real world. And so you can really dig into some of these standards. And that's just a snippet of what it would address. Obviously, it would also address, because it's block coding or Python or JavaScript, it's going to address many of these coding standards as well for the grade levels that you teach. So a couple of quick wins for any grade. Code.org is a completely free an amazing site for coding. When I was first learning, what coding looked like in schools, I went to code.org and just did a lot of the lessons as if I was a student. But they have a variety of courses. Each of these is a set of courses that you can see are aligned to different grade levels. The great thing is they are already aligned to CSTA standards. And if you need a little help with that, I'm going to link you here to this document that Brian Bates from the LTC put together. So you'll have a link to that. This is a document he's working on that right now. He's got K through 5, the fundamentals course on code.org. It aligns the lessons from code.org to the CSTA standards and aligns that to the Illinois CS standards. So if you're someone who's in charge of like planning and making sure that you're addressing all standards, this document is going to be super helpful to you because it goes through each of the courses from code.org and lets you know which standards are addressed. So big thank you to Brian for putting that together. If you're not familiar with code.org, I'd say definitely spend some time here because you can dig into any one of these courses and find a lot of really awesome stuff for your students of any grade level. And the great thing is they're such self-paced courses. I mean, you can assign students things to do and you can monitor their progress, but you can also just give them some open time to learn on their own. There's videos and instructions embedded and broken down. And there's even, I mentioned earlier, unplugged activities. Those are activities that don't require a device. You can, anywhere where you see an unplugged activity, you can go in there and there's videos and there's going to be worksheets available from the teacher end that will allow you to run this activity without the device. So there is the device component here, but there's also a place to go grab worksheets and things for your students to do without having to be on a device. Another quick win, if you want to look at high school and middle school, CodeHS is a great program that has a great website that has a variety of computer science programs out there. And let me give you a link to that. And they have a lot of advanced stuff. So if you're middle school or high school and you're saying, we want to jump into this quickly, we want to just grab a curriculum and get going, this is a great place to go. And you can spend a lot of time digging into all of their computer science. They have AP computer science. So this is great for your middle school and your high school level. And they have all kinds of things that aren't necessarily just coding, but web design, cybersecurity, all there. Mobile apps, a lot of great stuff. So dig into codehs.com. I do see in the chat someone mentioned code.org provides great PD. Yes, and the LTC is the regional partner here for Illinois for code.org. We've got some sessions coming up that I believe as of now, there's still availability for you to apply to go to one of those PD sessions over the summer. One more place to go, Seesaw is working on, they have already some lessons in place and they're working on continuing to develop lessons that align to those CS standards. You can see they've got a list here of the standards and then several different lessons that you can find and which standards they align to. So if your school is already a Seesaw school, you'll probably be happy to find that you can search for computer science lessons and find a variety of them already there for you. So again, really important to be able to jump in and just be able to start teaching right away if you're so inclined, and there's some great resources to help you. With that said, let's say you're in a position, in this section I'll talk a little bit about if you're in a position like say a tech coach, an instructional coach, a curriculum person, someone who is in charge of building a program, and you're trying to figure out how do I make sure it aligns to these new CS standards, where do I start? This is an approach I would take. This is one way to go about it. So if this is something that you're tasked with, or even if you're just a teacher who's like, I want to make sure everything I'm doing aligns to these standards, here's what I might do. I might first start by digging into these standards and kind of figuring out what does each of them really mean? What are they asking me to do just in plain English? And once you've done that, you might think about what am I already doing that matches up with those standards? Where are there opportunities for me to build on things I'm doing in class and include those standards? What gaps exist? So is there an area, maybe down here where I say, hey, I'm not doing a whole lot of this in my class. I need to find some lessons or some ideas to have students talk a little bit more about about this topic and identify those, and then start finding resources. So let me give you an example of how you might go about doing that. I'll take an example of one standard. This is K through 2, so this is your youngest grade band. And I took what I think is kind of a tough one. Again, if you're not strong in a CS background, algorithms. So algorithms, I have K2 AP08, model daily processes by creating and following algorithms, a set of step-by-step instructions to complete tasks. So let's say I have that, let me go back, sorry. Let's say I have that standard and I'm trying to figure out how do I unpack that? Like, how do I know that I'm actually doing this with my students? And how can I make sure that this is happening? Or if I'm a specialist or a coach or a curriculum director, how do I get this happening in my classrooms without overwhelming teachers? So some of the back end stuff you might do, and here's where it's important that I showed you the CSTA standards and the K-12 CS framework, because they come back into play as you're unpacking those standards. I'm going to start by going to the CSTA standards website. And again, because they're so similar to the Illinois standards, I can go down here and I can actually use this site to filter what I'm looking for. So I'm going to choose K through 2. I'm going to click on concepts. I said algorithms and programming, and then algorithms. Okay. I read through it. Yep, that's that same standard I just said I was going to unpack. When I click this little drop down here, it actually gives me some detail, and there's some examples built in for many of these. It says, I'm going to skip ahead. Students could create and follow algorithms for making simple foods, brushing their teeth, getting ready for school, and participating in cleanup time. What do you know? It turns out that this standard is about a way of thinking and not just about making a computer do something, right? So I can relate this to things that students do every day. An algorithm is essentially a set of steps. Students follow steps all the time. Okay, now I'm thinking about this in a little bit of a different way. Let me go now to that K-12 CS framework. If I jump down to second grade, actually it's already selected. Let me just scroll down and I find my algorithms. Here we go. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to click the description and I find a lot more information. And this is important because if some of these standards are new to you, if you're not a CS or a tech person and you're tasked with figuring this out, here's how you can start to build some of that background and make it make sense to you. Right. So one of the things they say here is routines, morning meetings, cleanup time, and dismissal are examples of algorithms that are common in many early elementary classrooms. Interesting. So as I read on, turns out that again, there's some real world comparisons to the things that students will be learning later on in computer science. So it's important again, then to kind of look at this and see, you know, as they go through this same subtopic throughout the grade bands, they're going to have to get a little bit more complex. So comparing and refining multiple algorithms in 3rd through 5th. In 6th through 8th, they're looking at flowcharts and pseudocode. I might have to Google pseudocode and see what that means. But I'm starting to put together what exactly are students supposed to be doing, and then what does my K through 2 teacher need to do to set them up for that later. Turns out we just need to get them to think about things in life as a set of step-by-step instructions. Turns out I can dig into some of the other standards that are out there and to start to figure out where these connect to those. And in fact, they do. So let me give you an example of that. And I kind of showed some of this live, so I'm going to skip these steps because this is exactly what I just showed you. But it turns out Common Core for 1st grade has this standard: write narratives in which they recount 2 or more appropriately sequenced events, etc. Step-by-step sequences, right? Sounds a lot like what that CS standard is about. And this one right here, write narratives in which they recount a well-elaborated event or short sequence of events, and so on and so on. Again, there's step-by-step writing. So there's opportunities there for us to integrate some of these CS ideas into ELA as well. So we don't have to necessarily write an entirely new lesson or make it fit in as an additional thing, just kind of tack on to what students are already doing. All right, so where might I start matching resources? So now this is where that Code.org site really comes in. It turns out, using that awesome document that Brian put together, that same CS standard algorithms actually matches up really well with things in both course A and course B. And let me just click on it. There's an unplugged lesson there that like I mentioned earlier, doesn't require a device. It does ask students to use paper and pencil to do some step-by-step thinking. So you can go to that lesson, or you can have them jump right into the coding. And this lesson, this has lesson plans with worksheets and vocabulary for the teachers. So it's all right there for you. Another thought, and something that I know many elementary teachers do, is they have students learn to write step-by-step instructions, right? Like how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich is one, right? You let students try to write the steps or explain the steps. You quickly realize that they're missing things, that they're putting things out of order, and their details matter and the sequence matters. And so they're already kind of learning how to write algorithms, and it's an ELA skill, but now you just bring in some of the CS stuff that does the exact same thing, and it works out really well and mixes nicely. Remember this quick win from elementary, right? Scratch Junior. Again, writing algorithms, step-by-step instructions. Students have to know how to put all of these code blocks in order and how to make them all start and stop at the right times in order to tell a story or run a race or have a basketball game occur. So you can really integrate these again into what teachers are already doing in their classroom, and you're hitting a lot of standards there. All right, so that was just one quick example. If you're a person who's in charge in your school or your district of trying to figure a lot of this out, and even if you're doing a lot of this already and you're just trying to take an assessment of where are we and which standards are we hitting and what's missing, here's a couple documents you might use or you might modify to help you out with that. And I'm going to drop these in the chat as well, and you're welcome, you're welcome to click on them and check them out. The first one is an alignment worksheet. So I might use this if I know that I want to try and see in what grade level I am hitting each one of the standards. So I might go through and I might look at each of these standards, and this is where I might do some of that breaking down about what they mean. I might jot some notes about what I think is happening, where I think this might be happening in my school. And if I know that this is happening in kindergarten and first grade in their curriculum that they already have with their library teacher, I might write that in. And if there's a curriculum resource that I want to make sure students are using, I can drop a link to it here. So you can use this tool however you see fit, but I imagine kind of using it to check off what's happening in which grade level, so I can make sure that every standard is being addressed somewhere. And I'll uncheck all of those so you can make a copy if you need to. I've got a version for 3rd through 5th and 6th through 8th there as well. If you're 9th through 12th and need a version of this, I'm happy to put that together. Just let me know. So that's one possible document you can use to start making sure you're addressing all of the standards. Another one is this mastery worksheet. This might be a little bit more advanced. So if you're a CS teacher, or maybe if your district already has a really good program going or some activities going, you might list a set of lessons across the top. You might list a set of courses across the top. You might list units or projects across the top. And you can go through and just check off throughout the course of a semester or a year at what point each one of these is addressing any of the standards. So let's say lesson 1, is addressing, and I'll show you what these letters mean in just a minute, is addressing these standards. As you read through, boom, those are being hit. And then you can just go through each lesson that you've typed up here and figure out where you are addressing standards and where you're missing them. All I did was create this system of introduced, addressed, and mastered. You could change any of those letters and names and colors if you want, and it'll populate to this drop down. You can make it match what ISB came out with for the computer literacy standards if you like as well, if that makes it easier. But that's a document you can use to kind of track how a course or how a series of courses are addressing all of the standards. So just a planning document, maybe to use or to get you thinking about how to do this. And then, of course, there's that crosswalk document that Brian put together that I linked to earlier. All right, I'm going to pause for a second because I see a chat question. We had questions come up on how to break apart what each grade level in the grade band will learn. That will help because we have a STEAM teacher for each grade band. Yeah, I'm sorry. And if I wasn't sure if you were just stating that, or if there was a question, if you don't mind restating that, I will circle back around and make sure that I address that question in more detail. I feel like maybe I already answered that, but if not, just restate it for me. All right, so one more example project, and I'm going to share with you a bunch of resources and links. So here's an example project, something that I did with a computer teacher in middle school. And what I'm going to do here is kind of show an example of how you can take a project that might be kind of on a a good project on a simple level and expand it to address multiple standards so that you can do some double duty there, right? And not have to reinvent the wheel or add a whole lot more content, but just modify what you've got. So this is a project that originally used a a tool called a Makey Makey kit. So if you're not familiar with Makey Makey, I'll drop it in the chat. I think they go for about 50 bucks. And they're basically a microcontroller you compare to a student, you connect to a student laptop, and then using these alligator clips, anything that conducts electricity will send a message to the computer to control all of these different movements, left, right, up, down, space, click. And so you can basically take anything that conducts electricity, like Play-Doh, or graphite from a pencil, or fruit, or aluminum foil, and you can turn it into a controller where students or anyone can touch that object and send a message to the computer rather than using the keyboard. Really cool tool. They're pretty popular in schools. I'm curious if anyone out there is familiar with them. But the original project was, all right, create a Makey Makey project where you make a controller and use it to control a Scratch maze that we find onto the Scratch website, okay? You can see kind of a picture of the Play-Doh. We show students that picture. 9 times out of 10, they make a Play-Doh creation that's very similar to that. And we go from there. So here's an example of that project. Just by doing that simple project, having students use everyday objects to make a new controller for their game, they've addressed these standards. They're recommending improvements to the design of a device. They're designing projects that combine hardware, the Makey Makey, with software, the maze tool, the maze game. And they're systematically identifying and fixing problems, because when they're building this, it's not going to work perfectly the first time and they have to troubleshoot to get it to work. So already this is a good project that's addressing a few standards. But let's start building on that and adding some more. Let's say that we add this highlighted part. Instead of just finding a maze on Scratch, students take a maze that they find and they have to modify it and build their own version of the maze. And anything in Scratch that you find, you can look inside to find the code behind it. And you can go ahead and remix it and use it on your own, right? And you don't have to use Scratch. I know some folks are mentioning that in the chat that Scratch is blocked, and I understand that not every school will have access to it, but if you've got anything that students would generally control with their keyboard, they can use Makey Makey with that. Again, this is just an example of how to make a project a little more aligned to all of the standards. Just simply by having students code the project themselves, they're now hitting many of these algorithms and programming standards. And depending on how detailed you get into what students' requirements are, you might be hitting more or less of these. Obviously, if students are not familiar with block coding, this might be an opportunity to teach them step by step, or you might expect that they come in with a little bit of background knowledge. They may have already done some coding projects, and this might be a capstone. But obviously, this is going to incorporate all of these coding standards. And let's build on that, because we don't want to just focus on the tech side of things. Let's talk about human impact, right? Human interaction. So number 3, let's add this requirement to the project. Create a survey and collect data from a focus group of game testers. So maybe you tell students you have until next week. You need to create a Google Form survey, give people a link to your game that you've created, and get feedback from them on what they like and don't like about the game. Or they can do the same thing about their Makey Makey controller. Let's have everybody try each other's controller and give feedback and take a survey on the experience of using that student's controller. Well, by doing that, you've done a couple of things. One, you've now addressed the impacts of computing, right? Collaborating with many contributors through strategies such as crowdsourcing or surveys. And they're learning how to use Google Forms, and they're getting feedback from their peers. By the way, they're collecting data, so there's some collection to the data and now some connection to the data analysis standard there as well. Let's build on that. Instead of just saying that they're going to design a Makey Makey project, let's see if they can now design a more accessible game controller, one that allows not you to play with it, but a student with a specific physical challenge or a student with a disability that would not benefit from using the regular keyboard on a Chromebook or a MacBook or what have you, but could use a different device to better access this game. So now you're having students think about the needs of other students. We're bringing the human aspect into computing, and they're maybe having to do a little research or do a little connecting with students that they may normally not connect with on a regular basis. And so now we're addressing some of these tougher to hit standards, discuss issues of bias and accessibility in the design of existing technologies. Can we talk about the way computers and devices and games are designed that may not be accessible to everybody easily? So now you've modified your project parameters to hit some even bigger issues that are really important, and you're building empathy into what students are doing. You can even add a reflection at the end. So here's a simple thing. Let's add a reflection. Students, when they're done with this project, have to write. Imagine your game got so popular that everyone your age was playing it. Should your code for your game be made available to the public or kept private? Why? So once you've built your game and sold it, should your code be visible to anyone? Students at this point will have pretty strong feelings about that one way or the other, right? They just spent all this time designing this code. They may not want to share it with anyone, or they might say, yeah, I want everyone to be able to reuse my code and remix it and build off of it and make it better. And so now, if you were to just ask them that question in general with no context, they may have had trouble addressing this standard, describing trade-offs between allowing info to be public and keeping information private and secure. Is the average 12-year-old going to have strong opinions one way or another? But once they've designed the code and they've made the game and they've done the research and put it together, now you might start to see that they have some thoughts about whether or not their work should be accessible to anybody to just take and reuse however they'd like. So again, these are simple tweaks to an already pretty cool project that allow you to go deeper, connect with the human side of computing, and address a lot of standards. And of course, students have created a new original work, so now we're addressing this emerging and future technology standard that the state of Illinois added on. So congratulations. By beefing up this project, and by the way, this is my favorite picture off Pixabay ever. I will use this over and over again in life. You just addressed 17 standards for the 6th through 8th grade band. So it takes a little critical thinking, takes some creativity and some talking between educators to come up with something like this, but you can take projects that you're already doing and figure out creative ways to make them a little better, a little bigger, and aligning to more and more standards so that you can do more without having to feel overwhelmed that you're doing too much. All right, so with that said here, we're going to wrap it up because we're just getting past our time. But here are some resources that I've pulled together. Obviously, there are endless coding and robotics resources out there. Here's some of my favorite ones. There's links to each of them, and it kind of delineates here what grade bands they're best suited for. If you're looking to get beyond just coding, but also get into robotics or microcontrollers, I mentioned the Makey-Makeys, but here's some other ones that are really good for a variety of different grade bands, and you can click the links and learn more about those. If you're looking for other sources for CS content, especially for these standards about the impacts of computing and emerging and future technology, there are a lot of really good libraries of resources out there that you can click on to find articles or find other content that may not be coding per se, but that relates to computing in general. And I'm willing to bet you'll find a lot of computer literacy related work here as well to address those computer literacy standards. And if you're in need of more computer science development, PD and so forth, the CSTA is an awesome organization to join. They have several local chapters as well, especially if you're in the Chicago area. They have a Chicago one and a Chicago suburban one, and they have several other chapters as well. The CSTA conference is an annual conference that just happens to be in Chicago this year, so we're very fortunate if you can make it up to that. The LTC has its own resource, and there's a few other resource database, and then there's a few other sites there that I've got listed. I do have a page here with all the documents for today. I'm going to make sure it's updated with that newly released set of computer literacy guidelines that Jesse linked us to earlier. And there's my information as well as the slides from today, the moment you've been waiting for. So I'm going to post those in the chat, and you can feel free to click them and save them, or you can scan the QR code and grab them with your mobile device.